I've lived on that stretch of land outside Laramie Ridge, Kansas, for almost 16 years, and I can tell you something simple about ranch country. If you spend enough years waking up to the same fence line, the same patch of grass moving in the same wind, you know when something's wrong before your truck even stops rolling. The weekend this whole mess started, I knew something was wrong from half a mile out. I was still easing down my dirt driveway after driving back from Wichita, tired from spending 2 days helping my younger brother move apartments, coffee gone cold in the cup holder, dust trailing behind my truck. And then I saw it. A gravel road. A brand new, wide gravel road cut clean across the lower end of my pasture like somebody took a ruler to my land and decided they had permission. I slammed the brakes hard enough to throw my thermos into the floorboard and just sat there staring at it. For a second, my brain honestly tried to convince me I'd turned into the wrong driveway. That happens out in the country more than folks think. Every field starts looking the same after dark or after a long drive. But no. There was my red cattle gate, leaning a little like always. There was the weathered cedar fence post with the split top I'd been meaning to replace for 2 years. And there, plain as daylight, was a fresh gravel road running straight through my property and curving off toward the place next door. My place is just under 18 acres, mostly flat grassland with a small rise toward the north side and enough grazing room to keep a few head of cattle healthy through spring and summer. Nothing fancy, no mansion, no dramatic iron gate, just good ground that belonged to my dad before me and his dad before him. Around here, land isn't just acreage, it's years, it's work. It's every fence post you hammered in with frozen hands and every drought you survived and every tax bill you paid even when prices were bad. The people around Laramie Ridge understand that, or at least most do. My new neighbors didn't. Their names were Preston and Alicia Maddox. They'd moved in about 2 months before all this happened. Came in from Connecticut with a moving convoy, shiny pickup, and the kind of confidence that tells you they were used to getting what they wanted fast. At first, they were friendly enough. Preston waved a lot. Alicia smiled every time she saw me. They asked where the nearest grain co-op was and whether the diner downtown still served breakfast past 10. Normal stuff. I didn't think much of them. Folks move in all the time. Some stay. Some realize country life isn't a postcard and disappear before winter. But one afternoon I was out fixing a busted fence panel after a windstorm when Preston wandered over with a bottle of water in one hand and sunglasses perched on his head. He stood there looking over the pasture and asked, "So where exactly does your property end?" It wasn't rude exactly, but there was something calculated in the way he asked it. I pointed with my hammer. "Fence line south and east." "Everything on this side's mine." He squinted. "That old fence?" "Yep. You sure?" I laughed. "Survey says so, county says so, and my grandfather built it." He gave me this little grin and nodded. "Good to know." Then he walked off. That should have been the end of it. I sure thought it was, standing there now staring at a gravel road dug across my pasture. I realized Preston had not asked that question casually. I climbed out of the truck and walked the edge of the road. Whoever built it knew what they were doing. Gravel packed tight. Fresh grading, drainage slope cut in, wide enough for heavy equipment. It started near County Route 8 and crossed at least 60 feet into my property before bending directly into Preston's driveway. This wasn't accidental. This wasn't a misunderstanding. Somebody had planned this. I called him right there. He answered on the second ring, sounding weirdly cheerful. "Hey, Cole, you back already?" "I'm standing in my pasture," I said. "Looking at a road." A pause, then a casual laugh. "Looks nice, doesn't it?" I swear my jaw tightened so hard I felt it in my neck. "Preston, that road is on my land." "Well," he said, dragging the word out, "the contractor checked the area and your fence looked a little off. We shifted over a bit where the terrain worked better." "A bit," I snapped. "You cut straight through my pasture." Then he sighed, actually sighed, like I was the inconvenience. "Cole, nobody's using that strip. It's grass. We needed proper access for our trailers and the slope on your side drains cleaner after rain." "My side?" I said. "You understand you're saying that out loud?" Alicia's voice floated faintly in the background and Preston lowered his tone. "Look, it's already done. Let's not turn this into something bigger than it needs to be." "Too late." I hung up before I said something I'd regret. Then I stood there with wind moving through the pasture and gravel crunching under my boots, trying to calm down. But what really got under my skin wasn't even the road. It was how certain he sounded, like the decision had already been made. Like they genuinely believed they could carve into someone else's property while he was out of town and by the time he got home. Well, maybe he'd just shrug and live with it. And standing there looking at that road cutting through land my grandfather once walked with me when I was 10 years old, pointing out fence corners and teaching me exactly what stewardship meant. I made one decision real fast. If Preston Maddox wanted to make this official, I was more than happy to make it official. First thing Monday morning, I drove into town and walked straight into my attorney's office. His name was Aaron Mercer, and he'd been handling land disputes around Laramie Ridge longer than I'd been paying property taxes. Aaron was the kind of guy who somehow looked calm even when he was explaining why somebody was about to lose badly in court. Tall, gray at the temples, wireframe glasses, never rushed. I dropped the survey packet on his desk, showed him the photos I'd taken, and said, "Tell me I'm not losing my mind." He didn't answer right away. He spread everything out, county plats, survey lines, old aerial photos, then leaned back in his chair and folded his hands. "Cole," he said, "you're not even close to the line. They crossed onto your property by nearly 70 feet. So we're clear, crystal clear." Then he gave me that little half smile of his. "This isn't a boundary disagreement. This is trespassing with construction equipment." There's something deeply calming about hearing a professional say exactly what you already knew in your gut. Aaron drafted a certified notice that afternoon, formal but sharp: remove the road, restore the pasture, 10 calendar days. Failure to comply would trigger legal enforcement and damages. We mailed it and emailed it. Then we waited. And I really did hope they'd come to their senses. I hoped Preston would drive over, maybe swallow his pride, maybe say his contractor screwed up and they'd make it right. I would have accepted that. I didn't need revenge. I needed my land back. Day 2 came and went. Nothing. Day 4, nothing. Day 6, I saw Preston using the road with his trailer attached like it had always belonged there. Alicia was outside planting flowers near their mailbox. She saw me watching and gave me this stiff little smile. Not nervous, not apologetic. Almost amused, Day 8 my friend Wade came by with fence staples I'd asked for. He stood there staring at the gravel and whistled low. "You gonna let that sit? 10-day notice." He laughed. "You're more patient than me." "Don't confuse patience with hesitation." He grinned. "Fair enough." By day 10, I already knew what was coming. The road still looked freshly packed, tire tracks across it every day. Preston didn't just ignore the notice. He doubled down. Aaron called me around lunch. "No response." "That's what I figured. Judge signed the order this morning." I just stood there in the barn doorway looking out over the field. Wind moving the grass, cattle drifting near the north fence, sun low enough to cast long shadows, and that ugly gray road slicing through all of it. "Let's do it," I said. The next morning, I hired a professional grading crew from Baxter County. Guys I trusted, big equipment, good people. Aaron had already informed the sheriff's office ahead of time because he knew exactly how this would go. Deputy Ramirez even rolled by before sunrise and parked off the county road. "Just keeping things peaceful," he said. "Appreciate it." We also had cameras recording every angle. Aaron insisted. "Document everything." At 7:30 sharp, the first machine rolled forward. There's a strangely satisfying sound when compacted gravel starts getting peeled up by a blade. It crunches, then lifts, then breaks apart like somebody undoing a bad decision piece by piece. The operator started from the county road entrance and worked slowly. Gravel scraped clean into piles. The skid loader scooped it into trailers, trailer after trailer, every single stone, every single chunk. Nobody dumped it off-site. Nobody hauled it to a landfill. Nope. Per Aaron's recommendation and with the paperwork sitting right there. We delivered every load directly back to Preston's gate. By mid-morning, there was a growing mound of gravel stacked neatly across the edge of his driveway. Not blocking emergency access, Aaron was very clear about that, but close enough to make the point impossible to miss. Around 11:30, a black SUV came flying up the road way too fast. Preston slammed on the brakes and jumped out before the dust settled. Alicia came around the passenger side, looking pale and furious. Preston stormed toward us yelling before he even reached the fence line. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" The grader kept moving. Aaron didn't even look up from his clipboard. I stepped forward. "Removing a road from my land." Preston's face went red. "That cost us 15 grand. Aaron handed him the court order. "You were given legal notice and a compliance deadline." Preston barely glanced at it. "This is insane. We built access because the terrain made sense." "On my pasture," I said. "Your fence isn't accurate." Aaron answered before I could. "County survey confirms otherwise." Alicia crossed her arms. "This is petty." That one almost made me laugh. Petty. A man bulldozes through your property while you're gone and somehow restoring your own land is petty. Preston pointed at the gravel mound near his gate. "You can't dump that there." Aaron calmly replied. "It originated from your contractor. You've been notified. Retrieval is your responsibility." Deputy Ramirez shifted his weight by the cruiser and Preston noticed him. That took some wind out of the shouting, but only some. Preston leaned toward me and hissed low enough only I could hear, "You really want enemies out here?" I looked him dead in the eye. "No, I wanted neighbors, big difference," for the first time since this started. He didn't have anything clever to say. The crew kept going. Gravel gone, grade restored, then topsoil spread across the scar, fresh grass seed laid down, water truck rolled over the patch. By early afternoon, it already looked more like pasture than construction zone. You could still see where it had been if you knew exactly where to look. But the road itself was gone, completely. Wade pulled up again just in time to watch the final trailer dump the last load by Preston's gate. He leaned out the truck window and muttered, "That is beautiful." I laughed for the first time all week. But here, that's where things somehow got even dumber. 3 weeks later, Aaron called and said Preston had filed suit against me for destruction of private property and reimbursement of construction costs. $14,600. I actually laughed out loud standing in my kitchen. He sued. He did. You serious? Very. Court date landed a month later. Small county courtroom, nothing dramatic. Wood benches, old clock ticking, judge who had seen every variety of nonsense a rural county can produce. Preston came in dressed like he was heading to a board meeting. Alicia sat beside him tight-lipped. Aaron had every document ready in perfect order. Surveys, notices, photographs, timestamps, deputy records, contractor invoices, video. The judge spent maybe 10 minutes reviewing before taking off his glasses and looking straight at Preston. "Mr. Maddox, you constructed a roadway inside your neighbor's surveyed boundary without consent." Preston tried arguing contractor interpretation and practical access and drainage and all kinds of polished nonsense. The judge held up one hand. "Did you receive written notice to remove it?" "Yes." "Did you comply?" Silence. The judge nodded once. "Then I'm not sure what outcome you expected here." And sitting there hearing that. After weeks of staring at that road and wondering how far people would go just because they assumed they could, I finally felt my shoulders relax. The courtroom got real quiet after that, the kind of quiet where even somebody shifting in a wooden bench sounds louder than it should. Judge Talbot looked back down at the paperwork for maybe another 30 seconds, then set everything aside and folded his hands on the bench. Preston still had that look on his face like maybe if he kept talking long enough reality would eventually bend in his direction. Some people are like that. They mistake confidence for authority for so long they forget the rest of the world doesn't actually owe them agreement. The judge cleared his throat and said, "This court finds no basis for the plaintiff's claim." Just like that, clean and simple, Preston's jaw tightened. Alicia stared straight ahead. Then the judge kept going. The defendant acted under legal notice and court authorization to restore his own surveyed property. Furthermore, due to documented land damage and legal expenses, the plaintiff is ordered to reimburse attorney fees and additional damages in the amount of $4,200. You could practically hear the air leave Preston's chest. Aaron leaned toward me and whispered, "That went about how I expected." I nodded, but honestly I wasn't even thinking about the money. It was bigger than that. It was the principle of hearing somebody in authority say out loud what had been obvious from day one. No, you don't get to walk onto another person's land, build what you want, and then act offended when they refuse to keep it there for you. Preston stood up fast enough to scrape his chair. "This is ridiculous." Judge Talbot didn't even blink. "Mr. Maddox, I'd recommend you stop speaking." That did it. Alicia grabbed Preston's sleeve and pulled him toward the exit before he made things worse. And maybe this is where I'm supposed to tell you I felt victorious and proud and 10 feet tall walking out of that courthouse. But honestly, that's not really how it felt. It felt quiet, like something heavy finally came off my back. Aaron and I stood outside near the steps while he tucked papers into his briefcase. He looked over at me and said, "You know he's probably not done being mad." I laughed. "That part I figured. You worried?" "Not really." Aaron nodded once. "Good." Then he headed off. I drove home with the windows cracked and late summer air blowing through the cab. By the time I turned onto my driveway, the sun was dropping low and throwing everything gold across the pasture. That patch of land looked almost exactly like it had before. Fresh seed had already started catching. Green was coming back in. The cattle were grazing like nothing had ever happened. Nature's funny that way. Give land a little care and enough time and it starts healing faster than people do. I stood by the fence a while just watching the grass move. My granddad used to stand in almost that exact spot with his hands hooked in his belt and say, "Land remembers who respects it." I never really understood that when I was a kid. I thought he was just saying old rancher stuff because old ranchers like sounding wise, but standing there that evening, I got it. The next few weeks were interesting. Preston and Alicia kept mostly to themselves. Their contractor eventually hauled off the gravel pile after a whole lot of grumbling. They put in a legal driveway completely on their own side. Smaller than the first one, less convenient too. Funny how expensive shortcuts get when you have to do them twice. We barely talked after that. Every now and then I'd see Alicia at the feed store, and she'd look away like she suddenly found horse vitamins fascinating. Preston waved exactly once from his truck, stiff and awkward, like he wasn't sure if he was apologizing or just trying not to look bitter. I gave him a nod and kept walking. And here's where folks usually ask me if I regret anything, if I wish I'd tried harder to keep peace, if maybe I could have just let them use that strip and avoided all the mess. Truth is, I asked myself that too more than once, because conflict gets tiring. Even when you're right, it costs energy, it costs sleep. It costs patience. There were a couple nights during all that where I sat on the porch wondering whether fighting over a stretch of grass was worth it. But the answer kept landing in the same place. It was never about grass. It was never even about gravel. It was about respect. It was about somebody looking at land they didn't own and deciding convenience mattered more than permission. It was about assuming a quiet neighbor would stay quiet because pushing back would be inconvenient. And I've learned something living out here a long time. Most folks are decent if you treat them decent. But every now and then somebody mistakes kindness for weakness. That's usually when boundaries matter most. A month after court, Wade came by again. We stood by the gate drinking coffee while the sun came up. He looked out across the pasture and smirked. Hard to believe there was ever a road there. That was the idea. You think they learned anything? I took a sip and watched a breeze move through the grass. Maybe, he laughed. That's a polite answer. Trying to improve myself. Don't overdo it. We both laughed at that, and honestly, life moved on. Fences still needed fixing. Feed still needed hauling. Rain still came when it felt like it. The land kept doing what land does. But every time I pass that southern edge and see uninterrupted pasture again, I remember exactly how quickly people can decide your property is negotiable when it helps them, and how surprised they get when you calmly remind them it is. Maybe some folks watching this think Preston deserved worse. Maybe some think I should have let it slide and kept the peace. I can see arguments both ways, but I'll tell you this. Out here we respect fences for a reason, and if somebody built a road across your property while you were out of town, I honestly want to know what you would have done. Would you have tried talking it out one more time? Would you have gone straight to court? Or would you have handled it completely differently? Drop your thoughts in the comments because I'm genuinely curious where people land on this one. And if you've ever dealt with neighbors crossing a line, literally or otherwise, share that too. I read more of those than you'd think. And trust me, sometimes the real stories are even crazier than mine.